Right now, I want to introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker is Ralph Tramontano. He's recently retired from his position as agricultural specialist from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection in Morehead City. That sounds, but he was an agricultural specialist there. He has a BS in biology, ecology, and an MS in animal ecology from Lund University, Sweden, and has worked with the Geological Survey, Fish and Wildlife Service, and the National Park Service before settling down, if that's the case, in Morehead City in 2006. Ralph has been an active member of the Sierra Club's local Croatan Group and is currently serving as outing chair and has led many outings in the Croatan National Forest. Ralph has been an active participant and now leader of the Croatan annual Carnivorous Plant Excursions. And he's going to be leading one this Saturday. He also, it's not up here, but he also does the Sierra Club, the local Sierra Club newsletter, and he does a fantastic job. That's fantastic. So, without further ado, Ralph Tramontano. They tell me I have to stay up here until I finish.
All right. As Mike said, I've been living down here since 2006 and spending a lot of time exploring the Croatan National Forest. And one of my hobbies is, in addition to photographing and cataloging plants there, I'm also very interested in frogs. I did my undergraduate research. My graduate research was in migration and dispersal in frogs in agricultural environments. Anyway, so and as Mike mentioned, I've been leading, participating in the Sierra Club's annual Carnivorous Plant Excursions. They were initially started by John Fussell. He's a local ornithologist who unfortunately passed away this year. And I've been first was attending his outings, then became co-leader, helped him with them, and now that he's passed away, I've been taking over those excursions. Anyway, so maybe we can get started. Oh, there we go. There, all right. So carnivorous plants of the Croatan National Forest. So one might ask what defines carnivory in plants. And basically, scientists like to make up rules. Of course, first they have to capture and kill prey in specialized traps. Okay. Interestingly, all carnivorous plants, the traps that they do have, are all evolved from or formed from leaves. There are no plants that use flowers as traps that that catch insects and eat them. It's always structures evolved from leaves. Also, they lure their prey with bright colors, nectar secretion, and scents. Then once the prey is captured, they digest it, releasing nutrients that the plant then absorbs. These plants usually excrete digestive enzymes, but some plants also have help from symbiotic bacteria, particularly pitcher plants that might hold water. There might be a bacteria flora in there, like in our digestive system, that help break down the insect material and provide nutrients to the plants. And then finally, those nutrients are absorbed for growth and development. Now, most carnivorous plants will grow without eating anything, without consuming prey. Okay, there are some exceptions though, but they will always grow faster and better when they do get nutrients from captured prey. And of course, people always wonder, are there carnivorous plants that eat people? In Hollywood probably. These are two more famous movies: Day of the Triffids, my favorite from the '60s, and then It's commonly little chaparros. But basically the answer is no. As far as we know, there aren't any plants that eat people. But small birds, rodents, and frogs have been known to be devoured by some larger species of carnivorous plants. Okay. Now this is the Nepenthe is a tropical pitcher plant from Southeast Asia. You can buy it in the stores. This is in my back deck with a squirrel tree frog. We found sitting in it, but he, after a couple of hours, he was gone. He left the plant. There wasn't any remains. Okay. So when did scientists, realize there were actually plants that could eat people? And the answer is that it took a little time. It was first suggested in the 1760s, the discovery of the Venus flytrap. And the scientist who formally described the Venus flytrap in 1769, John Ellis, in his description, he specifically stated he thought that the plant was an actively carnivorous plant. However, this was met by skepticism. People, the thinking in those days was still extremely rigid. Just 136 years before this, Galileo was nearly executed for suggesting that the Earth traveled around the sun instead of the sun traveling around the Earth. So the rigidity in scientific thinking was still there, and ultimately, Carl Linnaeus, who was the person who created our taxonomic system that we still use today, his response was, it was against the order of nature as created by God, that plants would actually, because plants are so well, they're passive, they're at the bottom of the pecking order, animals eat plants, not vice versa. That's the way God made things, and God forbid you should disturb that order. So, so it was, the idea was rejected out of hand, and okay, so that was that for the time being. Of course, 106 years later, Charles Darwin comes on the scene after breaking the barrier over the idea that evolution could occur and animals actually evolved, and there was actually speciation. Animals could develop to separate species over time. He then embarked on studying carnivorous plants, and he spent 16 years doing this, getting all his ducks in a row before he finally publishes his book. What's it called now? Yeah, Insectivorous Plants in 1875. And he had spent, he spent 16 years doing all kinds of experiments to definitively prove the insect plants, actually absorb nutrients and would grow better, by doing this. And he also collaborated with many researchers also. He didn't do this entirely on his own. Okay. So it took a long time before people, people could have a more flexible mindset and accept the idea that plants could actually turn the tables on some animals and eat them. All right, so why carnivory? Why would carnivory and plants evolve? This is basically an adaptation to environments with both extremely low soil nutrients, all right, but also high light and water availability. And the reason for the second is that the traps are not photosynthetically efficient. They're not designed for photosynthesis, they're designed for eating animals. So they might be able to photosynthesize, but they don't do a good job of it because they're designed for something else. So if you have a lot of light and a lot of water, you have maximum photosynthesis in these traps, and then the traps do the rest of the work for supplying the plant with nutrients. Okay, so basically, natural selection will favor the development of carnivory if there's a positive trade-off between the nutrient gain from the traps and the versus the loss, the photosynthetic loss from the energy put into building these structures. So if you waste energy building traps, you got to get more back from eating insects, and then you have a net increase in nutrients, and then natural selection favors then the development of carnivory in plants. So basically, as a consequence, most carnivorous plants are found in habitats such as open bogs that have a lot of light and with waterlogged soils. So they have plenty of light and water, but also there are very few nutrients in there. So they get their competitive edge by capturing and eating insects. Now in the Croatan, and in the southern coastal plain in general, it's very flat, very sandy. So you tend to get these, what they call precocian shrub bogs, wherever it's low-lying areas where water accumulates. And these are they're very acidic, they're very nutrient poor. And then next to them, in the dry areas, you get the longleaf pine savannas. The longleaf pine savannas are fire-driven habitats. They're habitats that require reasonably often, fires reasonably often to maintain the species composition that they have. Here's an example of a recently burned pine savanna next to a Croatan shrub bog. The fires, burns over everything on the ground in the longleaf pine savanna, but the Croatan bog itself is rather wet, and the fire doesn't spread into the shrub bog. And it's along that barrier between the pine savannas and the Croatan shrub bogs where you'll find all these carnivorous plants that you do find in the Croatan National Forest. The area is wet, soggy, but the fires burn away the shrubs that will shade them out. So this is they're not found everywhere, just scattered all over the place, but in these like linear habitats along the boundaries between Croatan shrub bogs and pine savannas. And that area is to be suitable for carnivorous plants. It has to be fire often enough to burn away the shrubs from the Croatan bog, because otherwise, without regular fires, all these shrubs, they start advancing out of the Croatan bog as far as they can into the pine savanna, and that including the area that carnivorous plants like, and they ultimately end up getting shaded out. So regular fires are really important for preserving and maintaining the existence of carnivorous plants in the coastal plain of North Carolina. Here's an example of a recently burnt area. All those flowers are Venus flytraps. You see a couple of pitcher plants also there sprouting. You see the ground is rather open, and you can, it seems like a very open area. You avoid burning if you haven't had any fires for several years. Suddenly you get a place like this. The wiregrass starts taking over, then the shrubs move in, and you just find the fly traps there only because the flowers are peeking out between the grass blades. But the plants themselves are hidden underneath, and they're being heavily shaded. Okay, and the longer the area goes without fire, the worse that gets, and the plants ultimately they're not able to compete, and they start disappearing. So without fire often enough, the carnivorous plants will ultimately disappear. All right, this is a kind of an undigestible slide. But there's a few key takeaways. One is that the very bottom there's a number 957. So every time you Google, let's say you Google, how many carnivorous plants are there in the world? Every website will give you a different answer. Okay, so this answer comes from mainly from a website, Plant Species of the World. It's run by the Kew Botanical Gardens in England. It's the big national botanical garden there in London, and they're they're big experts in botany, and they're on top of. It's a good website for up-to-date information on taxonomy, anyway. But that number is basically all the species in the various groups. And what you also see another takeaway from this slide is how many different groups, unrelated groups there are that have carnivorous plants. You have 18 genera and 11 families and 6 orders, implying, so there's a lot of very unrelated plants that are carnivorous, the implication being that carnivory has evolved independently many times. It's what you call convergent evolution. Many different organisms evolve carnivory independently of each other. Okay. And there are a few small groups that have a lot of species, like sundews, 259 species worldwide, tropical pitcher plants, Nepenthes, the picture we saw with the frog, those are found in Southeast Asia. That's a very large group also, along with butterworts and bladderworts. Okay, a little more, this slide basically refers to North America and North Carolina. So basically in the United States, there's only 63 species of known carnivorous plants. 20 of them are also found in Canada, 30 of them are found in North Carolina, and 17 of them are supposedly found in the Croatan National Forest. I've seen 13, and I'll show all 13 of them on slides later on in this slideshow. Also, there are various types of traps. They can be summarized as these categories. There's sticky traps, which act like fly paper. And then the most common type of traps. They're found in many 406 species in 7 families. So many different groups have evolved sticky traps independently of each other. Then there are pitfall traps, simply a tube. Animal goes on the edge and stumbles in, typical pitcher plants. And then you have so-called suction traps, which are a lot of species that have them, but they're all the same. They're unique to a group called bladderworts, genus Utricularia. And they're very unique traps, and we'll talk a bit about those. And finally, there's also something called a snare trap, which only a few plants have, mainly in one genus, Genelacea, corkscrew plants found in South America and Africa. They're sort of like snare traps. The animals, they're little structures that an insect might crawl into, and it has stiff hairs that are easy to go in one direction against, but if you try to back out, you get stabbed and you get stuck, sort of like a fish hook. So that's how they work. And finally, the rarest traps are the most famous, the snap traps that the Venus flytrap has, along with something called a water wheel that's closely related to the Venus flytrap, also has snap traps. Okay. So we'll start talking about the different species found in the Croatan. We have the Venus flytrap. They bloom in mid-May to mid-June. They're blooming right now. They were found in. It was the governor of the governor of North Carolina, Arthur Dobbs, was the first one to actually describe them in 1759. He thought he described them as eating plants, eating insects. He described vividly how they catch insects. If you look inside the trap, you'll see little spiky like hairs, and those are the trigger hairs. The trap shuts when an insect touches one of those hairs twice in a row or two hairs successively, usually at least within 30 seconds or thereabouts, and then the trap will shut. You touch the hair just once, nothing happens. Okay, if you wait too long and touch it again, nothing happens. But if you touch one hair twice within 30 seconds or two hairs successively within 30 seconds, the trap will snap shut. Arthur Dobbs, the governor, he was convinced that though they were spikes that had impaled the insect, they had insult to injury, it would stab the insect to death also, not just trapping the insect. All right. Here are the plants showing how the traps develop when the plant sprouts in the spring. You see the leaf coming up. The trap is folded down, so it kind of protects the trap as it grows. And you'll see flower stalks coming up. And then finally, this is what the flowers look like. They're fairly high, sometimes maybe as much as a foot. That makes them easy to spot. All right, so now I mentioned that there was one other plant that has these kind of snap traps called a water wheel. Not found here, but I mentioned it simply because it's the only other trap with the only other plant with these unique type of traps. They're found, you can see the map. They're found mainly throughout Europe and Asia, parts of Africa, Australia, and they've been introduced to the United States. And they actually become an invasive species in Virginia now, in an area around D.C. They're afraid they might, could be displacing native carnivorous plants like bladderworts. They're mat forming, and they can choke up if there's enough insects to eat, they can choke up a pond. All right. Then there's the next group, sundews. They're closely related to Venus flytraps in the same family, Droseraceae. They utilize sticky traps. This one here, the spoonleaf sundew, it's kind of rare. You don't find them everywhere in the Croatan, but you find them about. Basically, the basic sundew has the standard sundew has a round pad at the end of the leaf, covered with these long hairs with glands at the tips that produce its sticky sap, and then a long leaf stem. Okay, the insect is attracted to the leaf pads. They secrete there's maybe sweet nectar, and there might be a scent involved. The red color also helps attract them. But the insect gets stuck on the pad, and then the pad starts secreting enzymes that digest it and absorbs it directly into the pad from the insect. The pads can curl up. It's a very slow process. It can take a day, but the pads sometimes tend to curl up on the insect a little bit. But they don't snap. They're not active. They don't have active movement like Venus flytraps. These are the same spoonleaf sundew in bloom. They bloom a little later in July through September. These were found on it was rather a dry summer, and the pond had receded, so it was a bare area that was normally underwater at that pond. They were growing in that area. So you see the light again, open ground. The most common type of sundews in the Croatan are these two here, the dwarf sundew and the pink or bog sundew. To tell which one is, they're small, about the size of a quarter, if anyone remembers quarters. You'll see them on bare ground like that if the ground is, if the ground is normally damp. And to really decide, figure out which one is which, you got to kind of get down and look at them with a magnifying glass. Here they are close up of the dwarf sundew, Drosera brevifolia, and the Drosera capillaris, the pink sundew. The key difference, if you look closely, is that the glandular hairs in the dwarf sundew extend off the pad and down the stem, all right? Whereas the bog sundew, or the pink sundew, the stem is free of glandular hairs. So you're getting like me, you need glasses, and it's good to have a magnifying glass to see that difference. Here they are in bloom. The dwarf sundew makes small white flowers. Pink sundew makes pink flowers, of course. They bloom. The dwarf one blooms April to May, and the pink sundew blooms a little later in May and through the summer into August. Another group, the Lenticulariaceae, mouthful, but they're two groups, Pinguicula, the butterworts, and Utriculara, the bladderworts. Plants don't look anything alike, but the flowers are very similar, with the same structure. So they are in fact closely related. The butterworts use sticky traps, and the bladderworts have these special suction traps. So these are the two types of butterworts found: the blue butterwort, Pinguicula cerulea, and the small butterwort, Pinguicula pumila. They bloom both about April and May. They have a rosette of leaves at the base. It's like that. The leaves have really, if you look closely, you see like little bumps on the leaf, which are all these glands that secrete sticky sap. And again, the insects are attracted to this. They secrete some kind of scent. The insects walk on these, get stuck, and then they start getting digested right there on the leaf surface. The leaves, like sundews, the leaves tend with time, if they have prey on them, they'll start curling up, and covering the plant. They don't close up like Venus flytraps, but they tend to curl up a little bit, making it easier to extract the nutrients from the insect as it gets digested. There's a sundew next to that. And these are the flowers in bloom. The blue butterwort above, the small butterwort with the white flowers below. You see the flowers have these long nectar spurs, so which are used for attracting pollinators. It's now bladderworts, Triculara. These are interesting plants. They're considered the most highly specialized traps among carnivorous plants. Okay, there's some large number of them, 284 species around the world, 27 in the United States, 15 in North Carolina, and 8 of them supposedly in the Croatan National Forest. I've seen half of these anyway. They have the plants are basically stolons. They're not roots, but these underground stems or underwater stems, depending on where they live. Most around the world, about 80% of all species are terrestrial, live in waterlogged soils. These tiny little traps, between 1 to 5 millimeters in size, will eat small organisms like protozoans, microinvertebrates, and then some of the larger ones that are aquatic can even eat fish larvae, newly hatched frog tadpoles, and insect larvae. But most of them, the structures are stolons and not roots. Some of these species rely more on carnivory than photosynthesis for their food. Okay, they're the only ones that do that. And they're also drought resistant. Even though they grow in wet environments, they're very drought resistant. The terrestrial ones will produce tubers that will lie dormant when everything dries out. The aquatic plants produce something called turions, which are like bud-like structures that remain dormant until the place gets reflooded, and they'll grow again from that. So I use this photo. I use that drawing from 1760s, 1796, because it's hard to get a photo that shows the whole plant like that. But here's a close-up of the actual trap. Okay, they are small hollow bladders at 1 to 5 millimeters in size. They have a flexible trapdoor that creates a watertight seal. The bladder then has glands that pump water out of it and then creating a vacuum, so the whole thing gets flattened. Now, when some kind of, let's say, a water flea like a Daphnia or something hits those trigger hairs sticking out, it causes the door to flex abruptly, breaking the vacuum. The whole bladder pops open and sucks in the whatever it was that hit the trigger hairs. This happens in the space of less than a millisecond, very, very fast. Then the door shuts again, recreates a watertight seal, and whatever it was that got sucked in gets digested slowly inside the trap. And then after a while, it then re-pumps out all the water and resets. And it secretes digestive enzymes also. This is our first species we'll talk about, the humped bladderwort, Utricularia gibba. It's a mat forming. Sometimes you see a whole pond covered with yellow flowers like that. They bloom from May to October. This photo was taken in October, I think. This is a little pond on Pringle Road, very close to the, if anyone's been down there, there's a garbage transfer station. This pond is immediately north of that transfer station. There's a close-up of what the flowers look like. You see all the stolons in the water that form the mat. Attached to all those hair-like stems are traps. You see all that yellow in the last photo, all these flowers emerging out of the water. Another mat-forming bladderwort is the purple bladderwort. These are easy to identify because it's the only one in the state that's purple. They also make a mat, and you'll see a whole sea of small purple flowers. Flowers like this. If you look real close, you can see like see the main stolon there from that stems are emerging from, and the lateral stems or stolons you can see the small traps along that. You can just kind of just barely make it out in the picture. Another type is another bladderwort called the floating bladderwort, Utricularia radiata. It has a whirl of inflated stems at the base that keeps the whole thing afloat. And it sends up a flower stem from that. And you can see from the lower right, you see the branches extending from that inflated stem with all those little bladders on it. Okay, there are two more species of, there's another species that looks like this that I haven't seen. It's about twice as big, basically. It's twice as wide, twice as tall, twice as many flowers. The swollen bladderwort. They're supposedly in the area, but I've never seen one. Here's another photo of them. The pond's been drying up. They're kind of high and dry. Now these look like something from the day of the tribute. They look like they're kind of going to get up and walk away. I can imagine whoever made that movie probably saw these things. Got the idea. Make giant ones and walk around, eating people. Another very common bladderwort is the zigzag bladderwort, Utricularia subulata. They're hard, unless you're in bloom, you'll never see them. Sometimes they make tiny leaves. They're very small, linear, but basically they're just stems and flowers, and underground are the stolons with the traps. And these plants probably rely more on carnivory for their food than photosynthesis. So they're almost non-photosynthetic, these plants. They're called zigzag because they're at every node where a stem might come off or flower might form is an abrupt bend in the stem. So it has that sort of zigzag look to it. So these can be very common. You'll see them often, in bare ground like that. All you see is those little flowers on these wiry stems. Sometimes you see really massive population of them, and the flowers will be everywhere. But these are probably the most common bladderworts found in the Croatan National Forest. And then there are three other species I have never seen. Is the dwarf bladderwort. Should be easy to identify. Makes white flowers, but they're extremely small, a couple of millimeters only, less than 3 millimeters wide. And two more terrestrial species that grow either not in water, but kind of like in mud or the edge of the ponds. All right, then there we get to the plants with pitfall traps, the pitcher plants, Saraceniaceae. This family has about 3 different there's two different groups of them. There's something called the cobra pitcher plant found in California and Oregon. In South America, you have something called the sun pitchers, 19 species of those. And then the trumpet pitchers found primarily in the southeast United States, with one species, the purple pitcher plant, that extends way north into Canada. But all the other 10 species are found from southeastern Virginia all the way down along the Gulf Coast and into Florida. So in the Croatan, there are three species: the yellow pitcher plant, the southern purple pitcher plant, and then the sweet pitcher plant. There are three more species in the rest of the state. One more that can be found in around the Green Swamp near Wilmington, and two more are found in the western part of the state in the southern Appalachian Mountains. This is a stand of yellow pitcher plants here in the Croatan. And, it's not that often you see a dense stand like that, but it's probably impressive when you see them. They can be 2 to 3 feet tall. Okay, they have, the plants have specialized hoods. The hoods keep rain out of the plants. So the plants aren't filled with water, not this species. If they were filled with water, you see how they have such narrow stems. They would fill up with water, they would topple over under the weight. So the hood keeps the water out. It also acts as a guide. There are scent glands on it, colors a bit, hairs that point down. They guide the insects into the trap as well. Once the insects get in, they have a hard time climbing back out. They fall in, and if you cut one open, usually you find that the bottom third is completely filled with dead insect skeletons. Every year, the leaves themselves, the pitchers, they live for a year and then they die every winter, and the plant makes new ones every spring. Well, these are how they look in the spring. You see the flowers first coming up as very large buds. When the leaves themselves come up first, they develop as a hollow tube, and they then open up at the top and form the hood until they're pretty tall. So this is what they look like before they actually open up. The flower in full bloom, the flowers are very big, maybe 3 inches across easily. Consist of 5 yellow sepals, 5 petals, and a gigantic stigma. Now the plants they're designed for large pollinators like bumblebees, and they're also designed to ensure cross pollination. They attract these bees, and the bees then are forced to come into the flower in a way that prevents them from, the pollen they've got somewhere else ends up in the stigma first before they reach the stamen. What happens is you see in the middle of the picture, the petals hang down in notches over the giant stigma. It's sort of like an umbrella. And for the bees to get at the stamen that you can see in the right side, they have to crawl under the petal through the notch, which guides them against the stigma first. So you look at at the bottom of the right photo. That's the whole thing. That giant structure down there is the stigma, and they're forced to go through the notch and pollinate the stigma before they can climb upward and get pollen from the stamen that you see in the top of the photo on the right. And then when they leave, they're forced, they squeeze out between the petals, and that way they pollinate the plant first, then get the plant's own pollen and take it off somewhere else. This is another species, the sweet pitcher plant. Similar, much small, much smaller than the yellow pitcher plant. The hood has a hood to keep the rain out, but it's quite a different shape. Doesn't have a very narrow attachment. The flowers are though basically the same. They're redder. They have more red color than the yellow pitcher plant. You see the same thing. The sepals are redder. Most of the petals have fallen off. There's only one petal left. So the big thing you see in the middle below is actually the stigma, where the pollen attaches, to pollinate the plant. And then the third species is the purple pitcher plant. And this is a bit different. It has a hood, but the hood doesn't cover the plant, doesn't prevent water from getting in. And you can see on the left, in the left photo there, all the hairs on it help cause insects to land on it to slide down and fall into the trap. And these traps do accumulate water, you'll see. But the flowers are basically the same as the yellow pitcher plant. It has, the same basic structure, petals that hide the stamen and force the bees and other large insects to crawl in under and touch the stigma first before it can reach the stamen. Here the sepals are very dark purple, that's the name. They also fill up with rainwater. And the water is full of digestive enzymes, but also bacteria that help break down, the dead insects, supplying nutrients to the plant that way as well. So, and also, because they hold water, the plants don't stand erect, but they kind of prostrate the lie on their side in order to support all that weight. So, right, and also another funny thing about North American pitcher plants, Sarracenia, there are 11 species, but over 22 named hybrids. They can be difficult to identify in the field sometimes if there are multiple species in the area because they hybridize readily. And these are pictures of hybrids between the yellow pitcher plant and the purple pitcher plants. They kind of they kind of stand erect like yellow pitcher plants, but they kind of weird open hood like the purple pitcher plants. I don't know if they make flowers. And they're probably sterile, but again, these are hybrids that you encounter from time to time. So I think that is the last slide. So if there are any questions, comments, yes?
Yeah, hold your question. Wait a second.
Okay.
Is it working? Okay. Yeah, please wait for the microphone so that the people on Zoom can hear you. Okay, first question.
Hi. My question is with the, I guess, rapid decline in insect populations, have they noticed this affecting the populations of these carnivore plants?
I'm not aware of that. I would think that where the pitcher plants exist, they're fairly pristine habitats and a lot of insects there as it is now. So I don't think that's a problem. I think the real problem is that pitcher plants are probably affected, the carnivorous plants are probably affected by the same problems of insects. Habitat loss is affecting both insect populations as well as carnivorous plants. I don't think where the carnivorous plants are found, there's a lack of insects. They're pretty buggy places. But it's a good question.
Thank you for being here. My question is on the Venus flytrap. Once the trap closes in on its victim and takes out the juices and does whatever it needs to do, does the actual trap rejuvenate itself so it could do it again?
Well, yes, the trap simply opens up, and what's the remains of the insect, usually what's left of the insect will fall out or blow away. But the trap will eat multiple times. The other traps, like pitcher plants, they start accumulating debris, which can't get out. So it's one of the reasons that they die every year and new leaves are formed.
You said that on the Venus flytraps, that the insect had to hit it twice.
The
or-
trigger hairs,
Tri-
so the plant doesn't shut with everything that falls on it, so a lot of debris can blow in. So the trigger hairs are designed they have to be hit 2 times within a short time span for the plant.
So if you use your pen and did
Yeah, if you
with
poke with your pen
closing-
the right way, it'll shut on the pen. If you're growing them, you shouldn't feed them high protein material like little pieces of meat, because it'll produce too much acid and it'll actually cause a burn spot on the leaf, on the trap. So small insects are the best thing to feed them if you're growing them.
I noticed that the flowers are very tall. Is that one way that they can separate the pollinators from the trap?
Probably, and it keeps the pollinators away from the traps. Because again, the flowers never work as lures or traps for eating plants. So they want pollinators, so it's best to keep them away from the traps.
Me again. What, do you have any idea what the fire cycle was in pre-European contact? Because
I
fire is
think-
important.
Well, I think if you read, there's a book called Looking for Longleaf, which has some descriptions from historical records of, they relate accounts of fire in the area. When when Europeans first came, what they found here were extensive longleaf pine savannas. The longleaf pine pretty much dominated the entire coastal plain from Virginia all the way down through Texas and into northern Florida. And fires occurred all the time. The forests were pretty much contiguous for over long stretches. There are even accounts of fires, people are, seeing fires that started here in North Carolina and just spent the whole summer marching from state to state all the way down to Georgia, one long continuous wall of fire. And, lightning strikes would, regularly start these fires. And the plants that are adapted to these environments have adaptations that actually promote fire, like in pine needles, for example, are extremely volatile. They burn very readily. And so fire occurred all the time. And in regular fires, there's probably a fire every year somewhere. And then you hear some stories, some numbers like once every 5 years or maybe once every 3 years. There's a pretty high frequency of fire. And fires, again, because the forests were so continuous, the fire spread all over the whole area at some point or another. So now what happens, once Europeans moved in, they started, farming, they started fragmentizing the habitat, started suppressing fire, they started replacing longleaf pine with the more economical loblolly pine. You make more money out of them for logging purposes. So now longleaf pine savannas may be reduced to about 5% of their original range, and they would disappear entirely if people didn't go in and burn them on their own. So like places like the Croatan National Forest, the Holly Shelter Game Land, here, the National Forest Service does regular prescribed burns. The state will perform regular prescribed burns in places like Holly Shelter. The Green Swamp, owned by the Nature Conservancy, they do prescribed burns there. Then there's the Sand Hills Game Reserve. The state also manages with prescribed burns. Those are the main areas where you'll find Venus flytraps also in the state. And I think there's a fifth area in, I don't know if it's Fort Bragg or Fort Liberty or whatever it's called now. That area has an extensive longleaf pine savanna there with a lot of Venus flytraps. So to really preserve these environments, people have to go in and do the burns themselves, or these plants will disappear and become extremely rare.
Are the plants being affected anyway by the climate change?
Well, the warms up. Well, this is the northern range for most of the pitcher plants, so it'll only allow plants to move northward into our area. So I don't think it'll affect anything here. But it would probably extend their range northward. I don't think it'll get too hot further in the south. The northern species, there's maybe some cold species might disappear from the southern areas, but the northern pitcher plant might disappear. The purple pitcher plant might disappear from the coastal plain if it gets too hot. I'm not sure how its temperature adaptations are, but it's quite common here. This is a pretty warm place as it is now. So, but they're afraid. I think there is fear that climate change will cause habitat change, and that habitat change will not so much the temperature itself, but the change in habitats might cause pitcher plants, carnivorous plants start losing ground.
We've got a question back here.
Good evening, sir. As a science teacher, I used to grow Venus flytraps in my classroom. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
As you conduct your tours, do you encourage people to take any of the plants and grow them at home?
Well, it's illegal to pick them from public land in North Carolina, Venus flytraps. And I don't think there are rules when it comes to harvesting plants in the National Forest. I'm not sure what they are. I think you have to get a permit, and you're limited to how much you can collect. But you can buy them. There are people who breed them and raise them, and they're whole bunch of nurseries that are online that will sell pitcher plants and Venus flytraps that legally. And so there's even this carnivorous, the International Carnivorous Plant Society. They focus on how to grow carnivorous plants. So there's a lot of information if you're interested in trying to grow them. There's a lot of information online there. When I lived in Sweden, I was growing a bunch in a terrarium. And what I did was I got live sphagnum moss, and a layer of gravel and live sphagnum moss. That was it. And I planted them in there, and I had to plant, the terrarium with a lid, so it kept it nice and humid. We're sitting in the sun in a south window, and they grew quite well in that environment. The only problem I had was that the sphagnum moss would sometimes grow faster than the Venus flytraps. So kind of like, clear room for them. But one thing you have to do with carnivorous plants, because they grow in bogs with nutrient poor soil, the water they have is primarily rainwater. It doesn't like percolate out of the ground, but comes down and flows out. So it's very low in minerals. So when you're watering, if you have carnivorous plants and you're watering them, you should always use distilled water or rainwater, because tap water might have too many minerals in it, and the mineral buildup might kill the plants.
The geographic distribution is so narrow for Venus flytraps, other than just poor nutrition and boggy soil.
Well, it's not really known why they're not, because there's probably a lot of other places they could live, and they're not new. I mean, they've been around for a long time, and you go back 10,000 years, when the Ice Age ended, this place was too cold for them. So apparently they were somewhere further south, maybe in the coastal plain, in areas that they're now underwater on the coast. So they went, as the Ice Age melted, the plants must have migrated, with a whole lot of other plants into the area. But why they're restricted to where they are, no one really knows.
Yes, is there any wildlife in this area that find these plants absolutely delicious?
I don't know if anything specializes in eating them. There are a lot of insects, you exploit them. Some spiders will put their webs in the mouth of pitcher plants. Others will actually hide in them and then eat stuff that falls in. There are some plants, not here, but some of the tropical pitcher plants in Southeast Asia, the Nepanthes, they grow on vines, make these giant pitchers. There's some that attract rats. Either they attract snails or lay eggs, and the rats come and stand on the rim of the pitcher and eat the snail eggs, or others, the rat will stand there and lick the nectar off it. What the rats do is they defecate into the pitcher. So these types of pitcher plants are called toilet bowl pitcher plants, and this makes the pitcher plants are always full of water, and they defecate in there and makes a nice, interesting soup. The bacteria grows and digests all this for the pitcher plant, and they get their nutrition from the feces of the rats, and anything else that falls in and drowns there as well. So.
Yeah. With the progression of the ghost forest we're seeing associated with sea level rise, is that affecting the habitats that you're seeing?
Those areas where those forests aren't usually habitats where you find carnivorous plants. They're not. You find them a little bit more inland, where you have these so-called Pocosin bogs, which are just low areas that fill up with rainwater. The ghost forests are on the edge of rivers usually. They're close. They're tidally affected or close to the sea, and those aren't really usually. They're not the kind of habitats you find carnivorous plants in. The soil is too nutritious. The sea, you have natural flooding, which brings nutrients in, and I think they don't burn well. So I think carnivorous plants would be shaded out from those kind of places.
But you do see these growing along the Pocosin transition zone.
Yeah, where the Parnassus ends and the Pocosin bog begins. That boundary is where you'll find the most carnivorous plants, and a lot of other very interesting plants in the Croatan are found in that zone also. Interesting orchids, a lot of other wildflowers. So it's not just carnivorous plants you'll see there.
How many bugs does a plant have to eat to stay healthy? And what do they do in the wintertime?
Plants, well, the plants go dormant. Like I said, the pitcher plant leaves wither away. If you want to see how much they've eaten, you can slit one open. Usually the bottom third is completely filled with insect skeletons. So it looks like, dozens of insects fall in there and fill the whole thing up. But they eat enough, but they eat enough they'll actually grow more by eating when they eat. Venus flytraps probably can get away with just photosynthesis, but they'll definitely grow better once they've eaten insects. Same thing with pitcher plants. There's enough green material there for them to grow through photosynthesis alone, but again, you feed them insects and they'll grow bigger and faster.
So the ones that you grew in your terrarium, did you feed them bugs or were they just growing?
Well, I didn't have any bugs in my apartment, unfortunately, for the better or worse.
So they weren't,
No, they weren't getting fed, unfortunately, but not often enough anyway.
Any other questions? If not, thank you, Ralph. Wonderful presentation. Okay. So I want to thank everybody for coming today. There is still some food left over there. Please take it, because if it goes home with me, it goes into the wrong place. Also remember that we only live by donations. And so if you like what we do, please give us a donation. We plan to have some very interesting things coming up. Next time, hopefully, we're going to have a film, I think, and we don't know what film yet. But we're planning to have an excursion to the turtle rehabilitation. And we'll let you know when that occurs. So that's coming up too. So thank you all and have a good night.